Hey guys, I'm super excited to introduce you to Maxine Clark. Maxine and I go way back. She and I both started communicating through a service called Blogs, where entrepreneurs would give their take on some of the leading business books of the day. Maxine and I sort of became friends and have continued to carry that friendship along all these years. She's an inspirational entrepreneur. I'm super excited for you to meet her. Her official biography, however, is very impressive. Maxine Clark is the founder of Build-A-Bear Workshop, a teddy bear themed retail entertainment experience. In 2004, Build-A-Bear became a publicly traded company for the New York Stock Exchange. Today, there are over 350 Build-A-Bear Workshop stores worldwide, and 200 million stuffed animals have been sold worldwide. In 2022, Build-A-Bear will celebrate its 25th anniversary. Maxine stepped down from her CEB role, Chief Executive Bear position, in 2013 to start her next act to help unleash the potential of women and minority entrepreneurs and to use her entrepreneurial skills to create platforms and places that give access to more St. Louis families. Her latest venture is the Delmar DivINe, the transformation of a neighborhood eyesore, the historic St. Luke's Hospital, into a multi-use real estate development which opened in late 2021. Maxine has done so much for the St. Louis community. She's a well-known entrepreneur. I'm super, super excited that she has decided to join us for the Ripple Effect podcast. Guys, I'm super excited to have you meet Maxine Clark. Maxine and I go way back. We met through a service called Blogs way back in the day when we were both giving our opinions and thoughts on some of the leading books of the day. But Maxine, thank you so much for joining the Ripple Effect podcast. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for joining. I'm super excited. You are one of the most inspirational entrepreneurs I know. I have really followed your career with such fervor, and we'll get into all the great stuff that you've done and, sort of, all the great work you're doing, now, because I mean, you've had some, pretty major changes to your career path and what you're doing these days. But I really like to dive in really and get a sense of an origin story, kind of how you became who you are today, and maybe just give my audience just a little kind of background or perspective of how you became who you are.
That's a good, thank you for asking that. It's so much about your teachers and where you grew up and your parents. And, I grew up in the 50s and 60s when all kinds of incredible things were happening and being invented every day. And my father and mother did not have a college education. My dad learned his trade as an electrician in the military. And my mom learned her work as a social worker, not a degreed social worker from Eleanor Roosevelt. She was her private traveling secretary.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah, so it was a great background. So I had my mother who was, hands-on with children, and particularly children with Down syndrome. And my dad was, working in, creating in Miami where we lived, all kinds of growth and lots of opportunities. Not that he was always maximizing all those opportunities, my dear dad, but he loved what he did and he was a great salesman. And I learned that from him. I learned about customer satisfaction. But we lived in a neighborhood that was developed at that same time, right after the war, when people that served in the military got access, most people got access to the GI Bill and got to buy a house for a low price, and in good neighborhoods where they were building schools and, growing parks and grocery stores and, strip centers and all those things. And so everything was safe. I mean, you never locked your doors. You could go next door to your neighbors. You came home from school and went outside to play, and your mother called you at 6 o'clock and you went in, and the dogs ran freely. There were no leash laws. Your dog could run all over the neighborhood. My dog used to wait for me on the corner. He knew what time I was coming home from school, and he'd be sitting there just waiting, just so cute. And that was a life, So when you grow up with that kind of life, you have a lot better opportunities. And unfortunately, today it's so much harder, much more expensive. But so many kids don't grow up with that advantage of just being in a middle class, a lower middle class neighborhood. But it was all new and fresh, and they were building as much as they could to support the communities that were coming, the men and the women that were coming back from the military after World War II.
Well, there's so much to unpack there, but I have to ask a ripple question right off the bat because it seems so appropriate. What is one of the lessons that you've, taken forward and utilized throughout your life that you learned from that type of environment growing up?
Yeah, I think the best thing, and actually Oprah p- made this statement once, and it sounded exactly like my mother. She said, "It's not how much you have; it's how much you have to give."
Ah,
And
yes.
that was really how much. I mean, we really didn't have any money to speak of. And my grandpa one time took a quarter from me and he turned it into 5 nickels, so I could put one in the bank for college and one in the bank, for
That's
something I wanted.
wonderful.
As if you could buy
Yeah,
anything with a nickel, but in those
yeah.
days you actually could. And so also my dad, used to take his change out of his pocket every night, and I couldn't fall asleep until I heard my dad put it in the little aluminum jar that he had, that he
Oh,
kept it in, or the glass jar that he just put his pennies in. And then we got to, when it got full, he let us, separate out all the pennies and nickels and dimes. And, we didn't get it, but we got to separate it out, which was kind of fun to put it in the little, but you had an understanding of how much it takes to
yeah,
fill up a jar.
yep.
And so those are little lessons that when you're doing them, you're not thinking about it. But when you're older and you hear somebody else's life lesson, you say, well, that happened to me too. Maybe that's why I'm a saver, or why I, want to give to charity, or why I care about children with differently abled children. It's because I saw that when I was younger, and I saw all these things happening to America, all positive at the time. New inventions, and nobody told me I couldn't do that.
Yeah. Uh,
I knew I did find out later it was harder for a woman to do it, but I didn't know it at the time.
yeah. Well, and hopefully some of that is changing thanks to great leaders like you that are making a difference out there. That you're paving a way for female entrepreneurs to have a voice and be focused and do the amazing work that they're set to do, but perhaps with a more equal playing field these
Yeah.
days.
It's a little bit better. It's not as much better as it
Yeah,
needs to be. And unfortunately, it's particularly not better for minorities. And in certain parts of the country, it's really not good. It's better, but it should be so much better, because we need every bit of talent that we have. And we need to be making sure that all children have access to a high quality public education. They may choose to go to a private school if they can afford it, but most people can't afford that.
yeah,
And I think it's just really a huge opportunity. It's a disadvantage that we're at in America right now. And I think that's a problem that we're going to face for a long time. The ramifications of that are long term, because the children that are in kindergarten now are the workforce, 15 years from now or 20
yeah,
years from now, and they're not getting the education that they necessarily, if they can even get into a preschool or
yeah.
into a school, or if they live in a district where there's a good school district, or they get to stay in that district. I went to the same, elementary, middle, what we called it junior high, high school, in the same
Yep.
neighborhood. I still
Me
have
too.
friends that I've known
Yep.
for all those years, and that was a long time ago. That doesn't happen so much anymore because people are
No.
much more transient.
Well, how do you think, based on your perspective, what needs to happen to try and fix that gap, right? The educational experience, the challenges that are facing the public school systems. Do you have some thoughts or ideas on that?
Yes, I do believe that we have to strengthen early childhood education, because at the time that I was, little child in kindergarten, you didn't have to go to kindergarten. But my mother worked. Very few other mothers worked. So my mother worked. So I went to a kindergarten,
Yep.
and there was a local Cocoa Plum. It was called Cocoa Plum. I remember, not where I went, but there was another one where a lot of kids could go, and it was more of a daycare, because you didn't have to read by the first grade. Your teacher taught you to
Mm.
read in the first grade. Now kids start to learn when they're 2 and 3 years old. I have a friend whose little boy's 3. He reads absolutely fantastically. He's already, and so if you come from a family that doesn't have access to all the books, or both parents work all the time, who's teaching you to read at 2 years old?
Yep.
And you get to kindergarten and you're already behind when you should just be starting out. And so we need to really strengthen early childhood education, and especially since we need every single able-bodied person who is an adult to work in America today.
Yes.
We need to make sure that the parents, young parents, can work, because then you need those resources. It sounds kind of um, like Social Security, but it is. I mean, if you want people to go to work, they have to have a safe place for their children to go. And
That's
not
right.
everybody can afford a nanny, although the nanny might be cheaper than the school these days.
Yeah.
Or
That's
there's
true.
or there's people that can do that kind of work anymore, because everything costs so much. So you
Yep.
have to pay people a livable wage, and whatever that is today, because that's just really one of those things. That person has children. That early childhood educator probably has a child that they have to feed, rent that they have to pay. So it's a vicious cycle if we all aren't supporting the system. And I think that making sure that that's another challenge is that we've learned during COVID, is that we've always known that people who taught children in the earliest grades, like preschool, were not paid like regular teachers. They're paid
Right.
much less. And during COVID, they just didn't go back to work because they could get some other jobs that paid more money. So now we have a shortage of early childhood educators. And we also have a shortage of teachers, because what happened to teachers during COVID was unconscionable. And the pay that they get doesn't at all pay for the abuse that they've been getting. And
Yeah.
they also are desirable by corporations to be in training departments. I have a friend who's a teacher who got paid 3 times what her salary was to go and set up a whole training program for an HVAC company who was, wanted to bring in their training department. Instead of
Yeah.
hiring from local career schools, they wanted to build their own program, and she was perfectly, suited for it, and she's doing great. She loves it. And, she has a lot of freedom that you don't have when you're a public school teacher.
Yeah.
So um, there's all kinds of things fighting at that education that we were given, as I was given, public
Me
education.
too.
I went
Yeah.
to public school all the way through college. And I am so glad I went to, big schools in Miami. Our school districts, our schools were big. But you still knew everybody. My
Yeah.
high school had 4,000 kids in it. I knew just about everybody, but I certainly knew almost everybody for sure in my class, which was
Yeah.
about 1,200. And many of us are still in touch with each other today. Those bonds that you build as a child in a safe neighborhood where you can run out and play and ride your bike anywhere you want to go. And, that's not the world today. And I don't think we're going to go back to that.
No.
But I do think that there's a lot of other challenges. We didn't have guns, gun safety. There was just a whole different kind of, and we lived in a very middle class, lower middle. There were we lived very close to a lower middle class area too. But we went over there. We played with our friends that lived
Yeah.
over there. I didn't think about how much somebody's father made or mother made or
Yeah.
who worked and who didn't. I just was glad to have friends and play and and learn from each other. We had a great time.
Yeah, it's a much different world, and there are so many issues that need to be addressed and fixed, and it's hard to imagine exactly how we can overcome it. But I feel like with people like yourself that are so focused on contributing and giving back in your philanthropic efforts, these people will be amazed when I put the links up to everything that you're doing. I mean, you're truly the consummate rippler. I mean, it's really impressive. You grew up in that area, and then you went to the University of Georgia, right?
Right.
Go Dogs, right?
Go dogs, especially this year. Go dogs.
You must be really flying high after the national
Yeah,
championship.
it was a great football season, but not such a great basketball season.
No, yeah, not so much. But hey, you
I
got
got a great
one.
education. I got a fantastic education. And as big as it was, it's much bigger now.
Yeah,
And it seemed like it was in the country, and now it's just like a few, blocks out of Atlanta.
yeah,
So, it was just but every summer I worked in Atlanta, and I had exposure to, I was from Miami. I was from a big city. Atlanta was actually a farm town and compared to Miami at that time, but now it's far, you know, it's a big city. And I'm so glad that I went there, because in Atlanta, I saw what's possible in a city when people work
yeah,
together across racial. Not that it's perfect, nothing's perfect, but I want St. Louis to be the Atlanta of the Midwest. And I think we have all that we have all that opportunity. We have all of these bright young children. We have a whole bunch of universities here that are highly successful. And we should be, those kids that go to those universities are immigrants in a sense from another state
yeah,
or another country. How do we keep them here so that they don't leave and go back to New York or back to England or Japan or wherever they're from, and they stay here and help St. Louis thrive? And I think that's what Atlanta did. It made the most of its talent. And I saw that. I mean, it was just very, very visible. Every year I would go back there. I was on the board of trustees at the University of Georgia, and I go back often. And I just say, look at this. It's every day. Atlanta was getting bigger and closer to Athens.
yeah.
It was just so obvious what their direction was.
And it shows sort of the game plan, what's possible, right?
Yeah, yeah. And believe me, it's not perfect. There's no perfect. There's no such thing. And when we're all trying to make something perfect, we don't even try. But Atlanta kept putting things out there and trying and doing and trying and doing and building on it. Being the large metropolitan area. I think when I left, it was about 1,200,000, and I think it's like, over 5 million in the
Yeah,
metropolitan area. So it's huge. And I know a lot of people complain about the traffic and all that, but it's a thriving city with technology, consumer products, education, healthcare, all the things you need to make um, a community or a state even thrive. I'm
Yeah.
not I'm not crazy. I don't know that I'd go back and live there, but I do think it's a good example for the rest of us.
Absolutely. Well, so when you left the University of Georgia, did you know you wanted to be an entrepreneur, or can you share a little bit of
No, I
that
wanted to
journey?
go to law school. I wanted to be a civil rights attorney.
Okay. Oh, really?
And so I went to Washington, DC, because there were 11 law schools, night schools, day
Uh-huh.
schools, and I had to go to work in order to, pay for it. So I went to work for the Heck Company in Washington, DC, which was part of the May department stores. And I ended up loving what I was doing, and I took a leave of absence from law school, which I'm still on today, because I found I didn't. Who knows what you did in retail? I loved to shop. I didn't
Yeah.
have much money, but I had no idea how much fun it was and how complicated and how creative and how many things it crossed over, how many things I got to learn in a very
Yeah.
short time in an early part of my career, and I was very successful because I was always asking questions. I didn't, I had no idea. So I was asking a lot of questions and eventually got very soon after got transferred to St. Louis to work for the corporate headquarters here in St. Louis and kept getting promoted, from there. I kept working on really exciting, interesting projects that when I started, I knew nothing about, but my curiosity was my superpower. It always has
Yep.
been my superpower. And what I don't know, I can find out, my mother used to say, go look it up in the World Book, but now I can do it much faster, in Google. But
Yeah.
she would never tell me the answer. She would say, go look it up, go to the
Yep.
library, go look at it. She said, I bought that subscription to the World Book. And, I knew
You're
that
gonna
was a
use it.
stretch for our family. And I loved it when those books came. I don't know if you ever had seen
Oh, yeah.
they had a certain
The
smell to
supplements
them.
were the greatest,
Yeah,
right?
those
You get
supplements were great. The yearbooks.
yeah.
They're great. And almost everything I needed to know, I could find it. I would just sit there and turn the pages and see something new. And there, that shiny paper that would almost stick together when it was brand new. You had to
Mhm.
my dad would take it and he would open it up, flip the pages, like to make them shake them like you would a deck of cards.
Yeah.
And then it was easy to flip the pages. I just could look at them for days. They were just so interesting. And I think that part is another thing that we have to, it's easy for kids to use. A lot of little kids have phones, but to teach them how to do research, to teach them how to find out. There's so many better books about all this stuff. If you want to
Yep.
know about beetles or ladybugs, there's a book about them,
Oh, yeah.
and beautiful books, really well illustrated. But you have to give kids the chance to do that instead of doing everything for them. And I think there's a lot of kids that have had their world pretty much taken care of by their parents. And so
Yeah.
that's everybody's dream for their children to do better than they did. But there's a lot of children that aren't even doing as well as their parents did because of the way how complicated the world might be or how different society is and how different education is. It's not one size fits all. When I went to school, that's you sat in your desk and you addressed the teacher and you followed the rules, and it's much different today. And I think the biggest challenge we have with education is that we think that it's the same. Older people, parents that grew up like you and I did, we think, oh, it's the same, just buck it up, like just pull yourself up by the bootstraps.
Yeah.
But there's so many other issues and so many other technologies that if we aren't changing the way we teach kids how to use those, they're not going to go work in a factory. They're not going to work in an office. When I was in school, when I graduated from high school, most girls were teachers, nurses, social workers, or secretaries. I didn't want to be any of those things.
Yeah.
And that was because I saw television. I had television. I saw Perry Mason. I saw doctors. I saw
What was
women,
possible?
working
Yeah.
side by side next
Yeah.
to men. Maybe they were the legal secretary, but I didn't know that. Like I thought I could do that. I can be that. They did not have female astronauts then, but I had friends that I went to school with that became astronauts.
Wow.
Went to Florida State and went to University of Florida and majored in aeronautical engineering. And went it was just amazing. So when people that do that, it's possible. You believe it's possible anyway.
Well, one thing I want our audience to definitely take away is that, and you glimpsed me already. I was going to ask you a ripple question, what's your superpower? But you already did it, right? So, but that is a great superpower because I think the more that you can stay curious, especially as entrepreneurs and business owners, that you never stop learning, right? As an entrepreneur, it's one of the key things that is it's inevitable. You don't just make it. You're just constantly evolving and continuing to, to grow and expand that knowledge base as much as you possibly can.
And the other thing is that somewhere somebody has already fixed that problem.
Yeah.
They really have. And so
Yeah.
you don't have to invent it here. there are lots of ways to find out. Like you can just about Google it and say, is somebody doing preschool at an affordable price in the Midwest? Like that question. And you could probably find 20 cities that are doing it right. And
Yeah.
you could copy that city. You could call them. You could ask them. People, when you ask people how they did something, they're proud to tell you because you notice them and you know that they're successful. We don't have to reinvent the wheel all the time. There is someone somewhere doing it a good way, and all we have to do is ask, and you can have a Zoom meeting with them. You don't
Yep.
even have to have a telephone call or go there. You could talk to them. And most people I found in my life are always willing to teach you, to share with you. They're honored that you
Yeah.
even knew that they did it. And I think most stories that are written in the newspaper or told on television are just these sound bites, and they get the headline by the clickbait stuff. Something that sounds edgy. Even in the New York Times, I was looking for a story the other day in the paper. I saw it online, and I was looking for it, and it was a different headline in the paper, in the actual paper itself. Yeah,
Wow.
because the customer who reads it online is looking for something, sexier, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I was really just looking for this. I kept saying, why can't I find it? I know it's in today. It says right here it was 327. So I found it eventually, but the title was different and it wasn't quite as
That's
quirky.
interesting. Yeah.
A lot of that happens. But there are answers, or at least there's paths to lead you towards a better solution than you might be thinking of now.
Yeah.
And I think when somebody comes to me and says, I looked at 3 cities that were having the same problem we did, and this one improved their graduation rate 20%. This one 30%. This one is still in the same state as we are. You can kind of get some ideas. Well, gee,
Yeah.
then what questions are the next questions to ask?
Yeah.
So you can get to the solution faster. And why we built the Delmar DivINe, which I know we'll get to, is
Yeah.
because we really wanted people to be side by side working to solve these problems in St. Louis. Like today, I walked in my office area here, and one of the neighbors that's on the floor below us was sitting in there, who works with teenage girls after school, was working with us on our summer camp programs that we have in our family foundation that we post all over the universe, so that kids can connect together, and they're working on a program together. And that's exactly what I wanted. I mean, I just was like, oh, can I take a picture of this? But it's not the picture that matters. It's the content that matters.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But it is working. And I think that when you make it possible for strangers to meet and collaborate,
Great
they
thing.
will.
Yeah.
People want to do this
They
work.
do.
They just don't know how, and they start from scratch. And anyway, it's a real opportunity for us to be better citizens by working with our neighbors to solve the problems. It's not all on our back.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I don't know if you remember this, but when I first started with ExecuBlogs, you were so gracious. You and I connected on a phone call. Actually, I think it was potentially a conference call between you, me, and maybe Donna Carlin was on it at the time. And Donna actually is my co-host on a completely different podcast that I do now called Inquiring Minds, which so crazy to see how those relationships come full circle, right? But
Mhm.
I remember you taking me aside sort of and saying, look, you don't, I know I had a lot of confidence problems at the time. Like I'm a new author. I didn't feel like I belonged. I wasn't sure that I was just, even though I'd sold a company, I didn't feel like I was at the same level that all of you were. And I remember you giving me this great piece of advice, about believing in myself and not worrying about what anybody else thinks. You just do what is, what you're here to do. And I remember just how pivotal that was for me at the time. So I, publicly wanted to say thank you for that because it
You're
was
welcome.
very important to me at the time.
What you meet as you grow up in this world. I haven't quite grown up yet, but you meet a lot of people
Me
that
either.
that you admire, that they don't think they're doing such a great job. And
Yeah.
so, I think that's a good sign actually, because
Yeah.
it means that you have a lot more to contribute.
Yep.
And, it's just the attitude that you go about it. My mother used to challenge that. She said, if you think you can do it, you can do it. Now you have to lay out a plan, and but it's your attitude that matters more than anything. And I know that, like, a lot of times I didn't always agree with my mom, but I know I can say that she was definitely right about that. um, Attitude is 90% of it. If
Yep.
you have the right attitude, you can learn anything.
Yeah.
But if you
Absolutely.
don't, and you think the world's against you, it's just really hard to pick yourself up and dust yourself off all the time, because you are going to fall down a lot. I mean, it's
Yep.
just the way the world is. That's life, that's learning, that's growing. People ask me all the time, what's a big mistake that you made that you learned from? And honestly, so many mistakes. I don't even remember the difference anymore, because
Uh-huh.
you just keep moving. You fix it and you keep going, you adjust it. And I don't think of them as mistakes. I think of them as just the process of learning to be successful or more
Yep.
successful over time. We put too much of a price tag on what other people think is success, and
Absolutely.
not we miss a lot along the way. One of the things, the networks that you were talking about, though, is so important. That comes from also being curious, wanting to know
Yeah.
about people, asking a lot of questions when you meet someone. But that's one of the challenges that our especially minority children have, is that they women and women always had this, but now we've made up for a lot of lost time with many, many women's groups and lots of ways to connect with other women executives. But when you haven't had a chance to really learn about connections, or you feel intimidated that somebody's going to judge you because you're asking a question, that, remember
Yeah.
when somebody,
Oh yeah.
but this is a dumb question. There is
There is
absolutely no
no-
such thing. And I've had so many visits to children in schools because of Build-A-Bear, and they have the best questions. They're sometimes the most simple
Oh
question, but it's like they just want to know, like, or sometimes they'll, instead of asking you a question, they'll tell you something, and then that leads to a question, because
yeah.
they'll, oh, I didn't know that. They'll tell me a story about their bear, and we'll get into a conversation. But that teaching, that networking, I always tell everyone, when you graduate from college, the first organization or anywhere that you go is to join the alumni society. Even if you go to the community college or
Yeah.
a technical school, join the alumni society, because you wouldn't be where you were if it wasn't for what they gave you, the skills they gave you. And that's your first network, and then your
Yeah.
network gets bigger and bigger as they even have more graduates.
Yeah.
But I'm very fortunate. I have a big world. I still have my high school friends, even, and I have all the friends I made in Washington, and the friends I made in St. Louis when I moved here, and all around the world. And it's a joy. It's joyful, to be able to meet people. I can't remember everybody's name anymore, but I do, and I know their face and I know their voice, but we can click real quick. It's not like you
Absolutely.
and I reconnected. Like
Yeah.
you can reconnect pretty quickly if that relationship was um, genuine, authentic.
Yep. Well, so you mentioned it. So let's talk about your role as CEB for a minute. Chief Executive Bear. So tell everybody about that. While you're actually, I have a little.
I see him back there. I see
You
little
see
baby
it?
Yoda.
So yeah, this is this my director of operations got me this, and it sits in my office, and it is the greatest conversation starter when people come for a visit. But
Yeah, very
yeah, I
popular
love it.
item.
Yeah.
We all, even no matter how far back we saw our first, Star Wars movie, Yoda was very, very important. So everyone loves Yoda. I mean, many adults called me when he came out and said, "Can you get me one? Can you get me one? I know it's going to be." And then one of my friends was finally in the queue to get one because it was during COVID,
Uh-huh.
and he said, "I got it! I got it!" He's a grown man, I got it. I was so excited. This is fun. This is the fun part of the business
Yeah.
when it can relate to so many. Where this year's our 25th anniversary of Build.
Congratulations. Yeah,
Thank you.
that's
And
fantastic.
I remember when people said this will never work. It'll never work. And you always have your own doubts, but you don't say them out loud. You just don't know until all the customers are standing in line to get in the store. But we worked really hard, and our team that's there now, after I retired, has just done a phenomenal job of keeping Build-A-Bear relevant and in all the current trends, whether it's
Yeah.
Pokemon or it's Yoda or it's anything that My Little Pony, you name it, plus all the others that the children can just make anything they want.
So how did that business start? I mean, really, how did you have the vision for it? If
Mhm,
you could,
mhm.
share that a
It,
bit.
it goes back pretty far. Again, you don't always know what you're thinking about when you're doing it, but I love to go on field trips. So that was way back when I was a kid. We used to go to the
Yep.
dairy farm. We used to go to the bakery, those kinds of things. I love going on field trips. We all did. So going to Build-A-Bear is kind of like a field trip, but it's in your back, in your neighborhood,
Yep.
mall. Then when I was working for the Heck Company, I got to work with this incredible team of people that were thinking about reinventing our children's department where you could buy clothes, and we make it more grandma bait, which
Yep.
meant to create a lot of kind of a shop that had lots of things that kids would want that would be
Yeah.
affordable. And it was called the Land of Oz, AHH''S. And we tested it, and it worked really, really well. So we expanded it across some other stores. And when I got to make company corporate, that was one of the things I worked on. And that was another thing. So it's in your background, in your
Sure.
head, that parents and kids can do stuff together in a store. And then, I moved up the ladder, I thought, to the biggest job in the world that I would want, which was the president of Payless Shoe Source, which I was part of the acquisition team that acquired it for the May Company. And in
Wow.
1992, I was made the president. And um, I thought this would be my dream job, because I love shoes, because I'm a small person and shoes is the one thing I can uh, wear without having to alter it.
Yep.
I am the Imelda Marcos of wherever I live. And so I have a lot of shoes. And now teddy bears you can never have too many shoes or too many teddy bears. And now teddy bears have shoes. So it's perfect. But
That's awesome.
I, w- it was 1996 and the internet was coming on strong. But the
Yep.
May Company was actually pretty conservative about how you could use it in your business. It was still old fashioned, green Excel this not Excel, green spreadsheets that you
Yep.
do charts on. And we weren't allowed to send email outside of the company. And I decided that this was here to stay. I needed to go and do something on my own. And I was living in Topeka, Kansas at the time, so I wanted to go back to St. Louis. And my husband was commuting back and forth, so it was an opportunity because the May Company was spinning off Payless. So I came back to St. Louis, and I did not know exactly what I was going to do, but I knew I was going to do something around kids because Payless Kids had been really successful. The
Yeah.
Land of Oz had been really successful, and I knew that the internet was going to change things for children. So it was like a hard surface versus something soft that could balance that off. And so clearly, what was really popular at that particular time, you may remember, were Beanie Babies.
Oh yeah.
And my next door neighbor, Katie and Jack, I picked them up after school because I was, home and free spirit. And I picked them up from school and we went to go look for Beanie Babies one day. And we couldn't find the one that Katie wanted. She said, these are so easy. We could make these because they were simple little bean bags.
Wow.
And the light bulb went off. I had a Willy Wonka moment in my head, and I thought, "Oh my gosh." 'Cause I'd been to factories that made stuffed
Yeah.
animals. I knew how they worked. So we went home. The kids went downstairs to get out all because Katie meant make a craft project. But I heard something bigger, and that was the day that the idea for Build-A-Bear Workshop was born. And about 9 months later, we opened our first store at the St. Louis Galleria. But
Wow.
I was going to look, I was talking to a lot of investors at the time, and people were encouraging me to find a business to buy and reinvent that business. So I was looking at some retail businesses because that's what I really knew how to do well. And I did find a couple of factories that were making stuffed animals, but they thought I was crazy. It would never work in a mall. And so we went and invented it ourselves.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. That it's such an inspirational story, and it's amazing how it's become part of the lexicon for people of all ages. Like I've
Yeah.
had all different types of people come into our office here in Austin, and they see this and they're like, "Oh, is that a Build-A-Bear?" Yes. And it's like I said, it's the greatest conversation starter.
Yeah.
And so, that you've created something that's got some legacy, in a big way for a lot of people. Makes them smile, makes them, remember their childhood or
Yeah.
remember that experience they took their kids to. So,
Yeah, no, it's a second generation is coming to Build-A-Bear.
yeah,
If you were 10 years old when we opened, now you're 30 something years old and
taking
you
your
have
kids. Yeah,
your own kids. And so we have many of those stories. We have a lot of kids that grew up with Build-A-Bear that work at Build-A-Bear now.
yeah,
And then just the memories, it's so many children. I barely can go anywhere in St. Louis where somebody doesn't recognize me. And it feels like, and I've been many other places when we were traveling a lot in the good old days of, pre-COVID. I would run into people at the airport and they'd say, "Are you the bear lady?" Like and I'd see a kid with a little bear and they're like carrying their bear in their backpack
yeah,
and I'd always go up to them and always have a gift card in my pocket and I'd say, "What's your bear's name?" And they look at me like, "What's this lady talking to me?" And I said, "Well, I knew I could tell our animals." And I'd say, "Is that from Build-A-Bear?" And they go, "Yeah." And I'd say, "Well, I'm the founder of Build-A-Bear." And then they would talk to
oh,
me, like their parents would say, "Oh, my kids love Build-A-Bear. We've had birthday parties." You get it. It's a connector. And,
yeah,
you know, sometimes you want to be just anonymous, but I can't help it when I see a child with their stuffed animal, and
yeah,
especially when I know that stuffed animal is from Build-A-Bear. And
yeah,
I've talked to all kinds of people in the airport. Sometimes they'll let me take a picture, so I have quite a collection. But again, we have created something that is special, and our teams today, still 25 years later, are performing unbelievable, huggable moments with our customers. It starts with a customer and sometimes it's a happy occasion, it's their birthday, and other times it's a sad occasion. They're making a bear for somebody who's sick, grandma,
yeah,
or
yeah,
grandma's going to come in. And I had one where a woman, I brought her a bear and different bears and different sound chip so she could record a song,
Oh,
record her voice for her grandchildren. She had 5 grandchildren, and she recorded her voice for every single one of them because she knew she
oh,
was dying,
yeah.
and they all have that bear still. And so it just, it's just amazing to become part of people's lives in such a warm, fuzzy way.
Yeah, I said it before, but I'll say it again. I mean, you are just one heck of a rippler. I mean, you have created so many positive ripples in the world. Let's talk about the change though. When you left Build-A-Bear, you're on the board still. Obviously, you're still heavily involved from that perspective, but you've had a passion project there in St. Louis that
Yeah.
I know that we want to
Well,
talk about.
it's funny how this occurs. I mean, I started Build-A-Bear, I was 48 years old. So I knew that I needed to work quickly and that I would needed to make sure that there was a succession plan or that I had a timing on my time so that the
Yeah,
company could go on forever. And a lot of people don't, a lot of founders don't do that,
don't
and a lot
start
of
there.
people
Yeah,
told me, they said, you'll never be able to leave. It's too much a part of your life. But I knew that I could do this. And I was lucky that we found a great person, but nobody else could have invented Build-A-Bear the way I did, but somebody else could take it to a new future.
sure.
And there's a chance that somebody could also have made a mistake, but that didn't happen, thank goodness.
Thank
And
goodness.
not
Yeah,
there haven't been ups and downs, there have been, but not in our relationship. She and I get along great, but she's just a really talented merchant. We had a lot of background very similar. And she hired, kept a lot of people are still there that were there when I was there. But it is different. You do different. But I was one day visiting a school in October of 2012, and a little 10-year-old girl. It was a very poor school. And of course, I brought bears for all the kids, but they didn't know that yet. And our mascot, Bearmy, was back behind the curtain. And they didn't know that either. And they usually ask me questions about bears. They want to tell me a story about their bear. But these kids were different. And this little girl, the first one, stood up and she said, "My name is Tia, and I'm 10 years old. And I have a question for you, Miss Clark." And I said, "What's your question, Tia?" And she said, "Do you believe that all children's dreams can come true?" And of course, that was a big question.
that's a very big
And
question.
I could see the teacher in the back. She was going, "Oh no, like, can't she just ask you a simple question?" But I loved her question because I do believe that all children's dreams come true,
Yeah,
can come true.
I
Need some
me
help,
too.
but
Yeah,
so I said, "Yes, T, I do. What's your dream?" And she said, "My dream is to find the sun, SUN." And I'm standing there. I've lived in Florida my whole life. Never even had a question about the sun. I just took
yeah,
it for granted. And I thought, I'm talking to Bill Gates, like
yeah.
this is how Bill Gates used to think. And so I said to her, Tia, when I want to find something, I go looking for it. Like I go to the library, I'll go, we could go to the Washington University to the Mars, see the Mars rover and talk to the professors there. I was going on, and I was way out of my league. All the kids were laughing when she asked me the question. By the time I was done answering, it was silence.
Yeah.
And all the questions after that were about science, not about teddy bears. And
Wow.
they thought I had acknowledged her question because it was about science. And that's how insecure kids are sometimes. They will look around to see if anybody else is going to ask a question. And Tia today is a sophomore in college here at the University of Missouri, St. Louis. She's very, very smart. And we get together every once in a while. We didn't during COVID, but right after COVID, she graduated from high school right in that June of
Yeah.
COVID. And so we went to a drive-by graduation party. Her parents are great. And I've just watched her grow, and I think that there's just so much opportunity for children if somebody allows them, um, validates their questions, doesn't just say,
Yeah.
"Oh, come on, that's not for you, that's none of your business," or we weren't going to talk about that today. We're talking about teddy bears, not the sun. I would never do that. I mean, I just saw her, and that was a 10-year-old girl, Katie, who gave me the idea for Build-A-Bear, and a 10-year-old that told me it
Yeah.
was time to go find my son. So I drove home in my car and I called my husband from my car and I said, "I haven't found my son yet." And he said, "What are you talking about?" And I told him about this experience with Tia. And he said, "Well, you better figure it out because it's yours, that's all your
Yeah.
company." And the board of directors was very understanding. I mean, they knew
Wow.
we talked about it. It was just, we talked about it before the recession, and, the recession was slow coming out in 8 and 9 and 10, and we were getting back on track. And I knew that there was other work for me to do. I wanted to inspire other entrepreneurs, whether it was a school teacher or principal or a business entrepreneur. And aside from being a social entrepreneur now myself, I also invest in and mentor about a dozen other minority entrepreneurs. Most of them are women. but a few are men. And, I invest modestly, sometimes more than others, but it's more about the help, not the money.
Yep. Yep.
And I don't need to take any ownership for that. I just want to help. So I'm really, advising a lot. And sometimes they'll call you in the middle of a panic, like, oh my gosh. And other times, they'll call you and everything's okay, no problems, business is booming. And then all of a sudden you get another call. I wasn't paying attention to this, or, supply chain, lots of challenges in supply chain in the last 2 years. So they're all doing great.
That's
They're
awesome.
all doing well, but it's challenging when you're a minority, when you're a woman or a woman, and especially if you're another minority. Hard to get money, hard to get people to listen to you, hard to think your idea isn't just for you.
Yeah.
Versus that's what they thought about when the first, all the bankers I met were men. I never even met a woman banker or a woman in VC at the early stages, and they'd say, "Oh, the teddy bears," and that's a girl thing, like nobody, boys don't like teddy
Yeah.
bears, and that's not for us. And so many people came to me and said, "I wish I had invested. I wish I'd invested."
Well, yeah, I mean, you continue to inspire and you contribute every chance you get. And so, share a little bit about the Delmar DivINe project and
Mhm.
how that came to fruition, because now it's kind of a culmination of everything. You're trying to
Yeah, it is.
create community, you're trying to create an environment to inspire and motivate other entrepreneurs, you're giving places to start businesses. I mean, it's just a phenomenal operation.
Yeah, it really is pretty great. If I do say so myself. And honestly, the idea came from in St. Louis. We have this for-profit incubator space called Cortex, which was really for life sciences, and it became much more than that over time. And I would go there and work there, and go to meetings there. And I thought, why don't we do this for nonprofits? Because we have about 15,000 nonprofits in St. Louis,
Hmm.
and they don't necessarily work together. And most people can't even find out, you know, people that need the services can't even find them, let alone, people who start them up. And there's no really way to find out who's doing what where in this world of nonprofits. So in our family foundation, when we first got into this work, I started making ecosystem maps of, as I was finding them, I would say, okay, let's do one on early childhood, immigration, mass incarceration, food, all these things, because that's how I think. I'm a visual person,
Yeah.
and so one day I was coming home from a school that I was working in at the time in this neighborhood, and I came around the block, and they were nailing the for sale sign in this old hospital. I had no idea how big it was. I didn't know how old it was. It just was pretty ugly. And I thought, what are we going to do with this building? What could we do with it? And I went and inquired how much I could buy it for. And I talked to other people about doing it. And I thought one of my other friends was going to do it. And he said, no, I'm too busy. Why don't you do it? And, like that's how I kind of got into it. I thought, well, I had no idea. I literally did not know how big it was and how old it was. That was our biggest challenge. Is it's about 500,000 square feet, so half of a
Wow.
mall. And the first buildings in this building were in 1904. So they're still there. They're still standing because they built the campus, this hospital campus, around those original buildings, and they were in various states of disrepair,
Yeah.
and they were finally closed. It closed in 2014 fully, but it had been empty a large part of that time. And so I saw this as a potential to create a multi-use real estate project focused on the service industry. So
Wow.
we have offices, about 30 offices for nonprofits, with all kinds of common area space that'll not quite open yet, but that'll be open soon. Of conference rooms, a kind of a cafeteria, meeting rooms, just beautiful spaces, co-working space. And then we also took the hospital, the modern part of the hospital was built in 1961, so modern. And we turned that into apartments for teachers, nurses, social workers, public health, young people that make that 35 to 55 or even less. And we worked with HUD to develop these apartments that we could charge workforce. It's called workforce housing. So it's very exciting because that's
Wow.
not quite open yet, but that's going to be really, really great because you're hearing how expensive housing is, and
Yeah.
especially for young people. That's why so many young people stay home. But also, there's people that might want to rent an apartment, but they don't have a place to really work. We have a co-working space that they can actually rent a space in the co-working space as well. Even though we have offices that have long-term leases on
Yeah.
them, we have this co-working space that you can drop in, and that's going to be a big attraction. Plus, there's a bank, a restaurant, a pharmacy, and a um, financial advisor office on the main street that faces the neighborhood, that's open to the entire neighborhood. So we've really there's about right now about 300 people working in this building. By fall of this year, there'll be 1,000 people coming and going every day.
Wow.
Apartments, restaurants, all this. And that part is the economic development, and people ask me a lot, like, is this going to bring gentrification? Well, I don't want gentrification and what that word means, but I do want the people that live in this neighborhood to get their value out of their property, because
Yeah.
many people bought houses for much more money, and in the recent years, it hasn't been worth that. They can't even get a second mortgage to fix their house up because the valuations have, declined so much. So I'm hoping they get back to a
Yeah.
normal number. And I do believe that bringing young people into this community, which is a slightly older community, will they'll say, oh, I want to live in this neighborhood. It's so convenient. It is really Hollywood and Vine for St. Louis. There's no question about it. It is in a great location, right near a big, beautiful park, like our version of Central Park,
Yeah.
right between the Central West End Entertainment District and the college area entertainment district, between WashU's undergrad and medical school. So
Wow.
much going on. And there's lots of other development now. We were the first, but now there's lots of other development going on here, because you just need one person. And I didn't, I knew we could do that. I knew we could inspire others, but I didn't really, I was so worried. This project took so much bandwidth. I was, one day I just looked outside and said, oh, they're breaking ground for a new apartment. Oh, they're breaking ground for a new
Yeah.
office building. Oh, they're breaking. And, this was nothing when we came to it. But at the turn of the 19th to the 20th century, this area was the area of St. Louis, because it was right where the World's Fair was located in the
Oh,
park.
wow.
The park was left over from the World's Fair, and it's a beautiful park. And so there was all kinds of, just like everybody, every decade people were moving further west, in some cities further east, and others, knowing depending on how the city was located. And St. Louis was like this. So this became, instead of the Delmar, Delmar is a very long street in St. Louis, and it's the dividing line between rich and poor and black and white, predominantly black and white here in St. Louis. So it was kind of a negative to cross Delmar, to go north of Delmar. And those are the neighborhoods that need us to go north the most, like,
Yeah.
so we're not trying to reinvent every neighborhood. We're just trying to take good, like from the neighborhoods that are good, and just stretch it out, make it gooder
Yeah.
farther, into the city. And I know that's not a word, but that's how I see it. It's not like you have to, go all the way to this corner that's, nobody's going to live in for a long time, and make that better because you want those people to be as far away from you as possible. No, I want them to be my neighbors. They are
Yeah.
my neighbors. And
Yeah.
I live like 6 minutes from here. It takes me 6 minutes to get home. And I love all the neighbors that I've met. And the good news about this taking 6 years to happen is that I got to become family with a lot of people in this
Yeah.
neighborhood, who invited me to their weddings and their baby showers pre-COVID, and now they're starting to invite me again. And I feel very fortunate. I think I am so totally blessed to have such a wide variety of friends of all ages and all colors and all backgrounds and all male, female, young, old. There's so much to be gained by having such a wide variety of acquaintances and closer friends. And I just feel, just blessed. That is the part that keeps you young. That's
Yeah.
the part, like, if you're constantly learning and adapting and learning and adapting, I don't think you ever get old. And I certainly don't want to be, but at some point I won't be able to do this anymore, I'm sure, but I don't know when that will be.
Well, many, many years down the road, I'm
I hope.
sure. Well, let's wrap up with a few ripple questions. And I would be remiss if I didn't ask you this question based on how we first met. What are you reading these days?
Oh, I just finished reading not too long ago, The Broken Heart of America, which is a story about St. Louis, the history of St. Louis,
Oh,
the
wow.
racial history of St. Louis. I read a lot of stories about, a lot of books about that, what's problems we have in America. I'm now reading all the banned books that are out there. Every book that's banned, I've bought and I read it. Again, some of them I read a long time ago
Yep.
before anybody thought they were bad to read, but I'm buying a lot of these new books that are out there, that are just so inspirational. I wish they had those books when I was a child. So I'm just trying to catch up on what I've missed. And sometimes I watch a little bit of um, PBS,
Yeah.
Sunday night drama. I watch March Madness basketball. I'm a
Yeah.
basketball person. So there's not enough time for all the content that exists to be absorbed.
I know it's crazy. And who would have thought that from starting at the World Book that you'd be absorbing the
Well, I
world the
always
way we
loved to
do
read.
today.
That was my favorite thing to do.
Yep.
I met a professor at the University of Iowa. His name is Colin Gordon, and he wrote the book the first book about the Delmar Divide, the history of Missouri and
Hmm.
St. Louis and redlining and all that. And he came to St. Louis and he told us about another. He wrote another book called The Citizen Brown, which was about all the black neighborhoods that have been eradicated by progress, supposedly
Yeah.
progress.
Yeah.
And nobody thought about people's lives being upturned. And so you don't want to make those. The reason to read it is to understand the history, not that you did anything to do with it, but that you don't make the same mistakes twice.
Yeah.
That's really the purpose. And so I love history anyway, so I'm always gobbling up anything I can that gives me. I haven't finished it, but I've been reading 1619, which
Oh,
is
yep.
amazing recreation of the first landing of slaves in this country. And it's hard to imagine. It's hard to imagine that this actually happened to people. But I just want to make sure it doesn't ever happen again. And
Yep.
that's why I read all this.
Yeah. Wow, that's great. Where do you find your inspiration?
Children,
Yeah.
somebody asked me this the other day, why do you do this for the children? Because they are our future, and people invested in me and gave me all those helps up, and I want to do the same thing. I'm so excited that we have so much talent and that they don't have the same talents that I had, and they have much more um, uh, you know native to technology, and it's just natural to them, so they don't have all the learning curve that we had. And I think that they see the world through much more optimistic glasses than we do.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, that's a great answer. What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given, and how have you used it?
Well, I think it's that what my mother used to say to me, and what Oprah put into such good words, which is, it's not how much you have, it's how much you have to give. And
Yeah.
it's not about what a big check you can write, although fortunately now I can do that. But when I was a young executive at the May Company and they had a matching gifts program, I gave $50 and it became 100, or I gave 100 and it became 200. And one day they had they had a meeting, and they called me to the meeting, and they said that I had maximized the company's matching gifts program by lots of $25 gifts, that I had written to somebody, and they had matched it. So my 25 was 50, and then I got a little bit more money. And the United Way was a big thing that the May Company taught me, that corporations can be engaged in the community in
Yeah.
meaningful ways, that we can't just take out money by selling stuff. We have to put money and time back in. And so that was also that the leaders that I worked for were great civic examples as well. That they were almost all men, but they taught me a lot, and I thought that I never no one ever told me I couldn't do it. I
I
always
love
thought of myself as 6 foot tall.
it. I love that. Last question. What does the ripple effect mean to you?
Well, I think that's what it's all about, is that, it's what you can put back into the world that you took out, and then you can give it back. And those ripples keep growing, across the oceans, like there's so many things that you'll never know that you touch that person, because that person, you haven't been able to stay in touch with them. And when I started Build-A-Bear, when Build-A-Bear went public, I went to find my teachers, to thank them and give them something financial reward for that,
Yeah.
which none of them would take, by the way. But that they didn't even know. They
Wow.
knew, they had read about me, but they didn't know what I was doing and how I was thinking about it and how much I could actually credit to each of them. I had great teachers. So to me, that's the ripple. It starts back when you're just a child and somebody does something for you and you just keep doing it. And my mother was a real good doobie. I mean, she really was. She taught me about a lot about children that are differently abled, not necessarily the same abilities as myself, or
Hmm.
there's people that have much more ability than I do, but she looked at it so differently. And now children today with Down syndrome, like my mother worked with, have all kinds of their life expectancy is, you know, so long. And this was not the case in 1955. It
Yeah.
was maybe 16 or 18 years old. So the ripple effect for different jobs is different things, but um, we've sold over 200 million stuffed animals. That's a pretty big ripple right there.
Yeah, absolutely. Without question. Well, Maxine, you are my hero. I am so grateful to know you. I'm so appreciative of our friendship that you return my calls or are willing to jump
Oh,
on a Zoom call or anything. I mean, you
this
are
is
just
fun.
amazing. And
This
I
is
guarantee
fun.
well, I guarantee you we'll have to do a follow-up because I think there's going to be a lot of response on this episode. I am so grateful for you joining the Ripple Effect podcast. I hope you have a phenomenal evening. Thanks for making time for me. And as always, ripple on.
Ripple on.